Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is Where Have You Created Your Own Cage in Mothering? So we would love to preface this with a bit of camaraderie to let you know this is not about judgment, because we literally all do it all of the time.
Yeah, and I think there are seasons for our cages, right?
Well, I also think
cage flavor of the month.
Right. I think this is a reflection of values, right?
Yeah.
Like we always, whatever we're like is so important to our soul or our growth right now, we like super invested in, love, read about, think about, dream about, manifest about, project about, fantasize about, until we like reach that thing, fulfill that karma, grow in the way we need to with that. And then we're like down the other side of the roller coaster. Oh, I don't dig that as much as I used to. Oh, there's all these drawbacks to that thing. I don't love it as much as I used to. Here's the new shiny thing. Off we go. Right.
Yes.
Like,
I love the way you've said that. It's literally like a roller coaster.
Literally.
Like the giddy excitement of infatuation. Like, oh my God, what's this going to be like? Oh my God, oh my God. Like all I want to do is like consume all of this excitement.
Like it's the most important thing in the whole world.
Yeah, which naturally you then have to get balanced out on. So
until it's not the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, in the phase of infatuation, growth and learning, which we will also state is extremely important and necessary for your soul and its journey, you can't have it another way. Like that, there's genius in that. Is that we will all build a cage for ourselves or for our children because of the way in which we are seeing the world based on that thing that we are at this moment in time completely invested in.
Yes, and by extension, how much our current identity is entangled with whatever this cage's dominant belief system is, engaged with, right? So there'll be a belief system that's driving the cage, and it requires deep, humility to actually go, I'm believing this and making that thing wrong in order to prop up the current identity that I hold. And if I was to actually kind of see that, oh my God, it's like that Rumi quote, why do you stay in the cage when the door is wide open? The door is wide open when you allow yourself and your mind to expand enough to be the bridge between you and that other potential reality that would allow you to no longer be inside that cage.
I just love how you explained that. Yes.
Knowing that because you're human, you just create a different cage.
Yeah, right.
But how profound to have the awareness of, even when that you're there, you go, oh, okay, I'm here.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I actually don't think there could be a deeper spiritual self-growth process than recognizing essentially what we're asking you to do here is disentangle your ego from your identity.
Yeah.
And to humble yourself enough to love more. Like, could there be a deeper spiritual practice? I don't think so.
I think that's it. I mean, essentially what we're talking about is like, how much can you own the reflections of the world that are going to be coming at you, especially when you're like hard line on your belief system to prop up the, you know, legitimacy of your cage, to actually like be with that intensity of those mirrors and those judgments that you perceive, and you know, the pair of opposite, like the opposite that you're going to be attracting as a way to break your infatuation with the cage you're in. That can be brutal, but it is the pathway to your growth.
Totally. So maybe we start with, where have you created a cage for yourself in your mothering journey?
I think one that I've been coming up against a little bit lately has been screens. And it's been one, I mean, there's a couple, and I think another one is like listening to feelings and that pressure that I put on myself to be available for the expression and feeling, and to not shut down my children's emotions, and to, you know, like expand my capacity to meet them and all of that stuff. And not often really see the drawback of that, because it's a high value for me. So I'm not going into, well, the drawback of you doing that is that you didn't get to clean your house. Or the drawback of you doing that is you didn't get to finish that thing you wanted to do for your work. Or the drawback to that for you was that you didn't get to focus on building your finances because you're listening to emotions. None of that is really happening because it's still a high enough value. And I perceive that the drawback of that isn't as great as the drawback to not meeting my children in that way, because my void is not being seen and heard, right? The void drives the value. But that's not really what the one I want to talk about today, because the one I want to talk about today, which I know is pertinent for many parents, is a relationship with screen time for our children. Specifically, I think shows that we might think are trashy, as opposed to shows that we might think are somewhat educational. But particularly like iPad use and gaming. And I know if you're listening to this podcast, it's something that you think about, and it's probably not comfortable for you to put your child in front of a screen for hours and hours on end and allow that screen to kind of run them, which is what tends to happen because gamification is so powerful, and advertising is so powerful, you know, for our brain. So actually had someone, I've been popping little tidbits in my stories about some of the expanding edges I've been doing with my son and his interest in games. And I had some people say to me, I'd love you to do a podcast on that. So this is part of that, is part of that conversation. But what I've really been asking myself to notice is what the value is to my child and his values. Like, and he said to me the other day, he's like, oh, Mum, guess what? I know how to spell the word asphalt. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, oh, yeah, I learned on hill climb, right? And then now he's loving Minecraft, yeah. And then so the other night, so that last night at bedtime, he read a whole book, like spent an hour just reading a book about Minecraft. And so what I find is that this reflection for me, which I try to do pretty regularly, is a really great way for me to smash my own kind of arbitrary limits that I can tend to want to come and impose on my children around how long that they should be on a screen for, based on my comfort level, as opposed to, you know, necessarily based on anything significant in them or for them, right? And my comfort level is framed by, I know, like my mother's beliefs around what happens to kids if they spend too much time on screens, and her experience working with teaching teens who are screen addicts, and the meaning that we make. So maybe we're frazzled and busy and feel overwhelmed by the house, and then we look across at a child who just seems to be lazy on the couch on a screen in our mind, doing something completely unproductive, not contributing in any way, not useful, like whatever label you want to throw at it, which we then can tend to throw on them in those moments of frustration in us, not recognizing how that can, one, harm the relationship, two, the child not really bring you their whole self because they realize how much of these developing parts of them or their identity, if they're big into screens or games, is not safe with you because you don't understand. And 3, that you kind of miss the point. Like you miss the point of like who gets to decide what is meaningful learning or development for your child. Like who gets to decide that? Like is it you, or do they get to participate in that with you? And so those are kind of like the things I've been exploring within myself, particularly over the summer holidays when, you know, there's much more flexibility and just like, I just find it fascinating, that relationship between our child and us and what we come to determine is right or wrong, and how in the past I have let my screen limits become a cage for me and a cage for my child, right? Like if I just blanket said, nope, not having any today, or, you know, you've had enough, but based on what? My level of like anxiety about your time on it, like where does that come from? And does that judgment that I'm projecting on him just serve to make myself feel better? And then that reminds me of that Alfie Kohn quote. I think he talks about it in Unconditional Parenting, where he says, you know, did what you just do to your child have more to do with you and your own, you know, old beliefs or dogma rather than your child? Essentially, basically saying, was it really about your child just then, or was it about all the stuff you're just bringing to this moment that actually doesn't have them at the center at all? And like, I mean, we do this forever and a day. We're not going to not project on our child, but if we want to center a relationship with them, and if we deeply desire for their personality to develop in alignment with their soul and not kind of fragment and become this shell based on performing for approval from their authorities, then we have to look at this stuff. Because otherwise,
deeply uncomfortable though, isn't it?
Yes, right?
Like even as you're saying it, I'm like, yeah, I could totally do better. I could totally do that more. Yep, that moment there, you know, which I'm sure is what all our listeners.
Yes.
And then I noticed, and then I noticed this like holding or tension in my solar plexus, just in the top part of my gut, and I'm like, oh, what is that? But that's like anxiety, isn't it?
Yeah.
The anxiety of letting that go, the anxiety of not rushing in with action that makes you feel better in the moment, but you say it's about your child's well-being, but you're the one in action feeling better because you're in action, which I totally get, rather than the thought of replaying those moments in my mind and not moving into action, but instead sitting in, what if everything I've held to be true is wrong?
Yeah.
And what if I didn't interrupt this right now? And that tension is there, and then I have to be with that, right? Like that feels really hard.
Instead of resolving that, because resolving the tension is get off, you've had enough time on there, like, you know, that's resolving the tension for you, right? And because we hate to be in tension. It's the same thing in relationship and in your work with Queen School, right? Like for couples to develop their deeper relationships, they have to build their capacity to be in more tension.
Totally. Yeah.
But for us to allow more of our children to be who they are, we also have to be with our own tension in that process.
Yeah.
Which is excruciating sometimes.
So hard, isn't it?
And quite frankly, sometimes we simply just can't, right? Like the level of activation is so big that something has to, like, you know, something has to resolve in us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually like totally huge. So I really loved that you were talking about what is your anxiety here. And what I loved about that was just take a pause for a moment. What are you making it mean? So I just love that you were saying that. Like, where has this come from? Why do I believe this? Where has this rule or belief or thought process or need come from? Like, is it true or is it arbitrary? because in this moment you're in a reaction. So I loved that you were saying just take a moment and think about what is the anxiety that you're making it mean? What does this mean?
Mm.
So if I think about it, I'm like, well, he'll be lazy for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
He'll never achieve anything. He'll never get good grades in school. He'll never go to uni. He'll never get a good job because he's not ready to work hard enough. Like, it's amazing how our brain can go.
And that imperative nature of it, it's just like, it's so black and white, like that, you know, it can't be true, but like that's the way that our brain makes meaning sometimes, which is when you know why and that's where you know, oh my God, I'm so polarized on this.
Yeah.
And I also would suggest that whatever it is, whether it's screens, whether your cage is something else, you must go back and look at your own relationship with that thing growing up and your parents' perception of your relationship with that thing, if you can recall the memories of it. And so as part of the process of my son exploring Minecraft particularly, I went back and looked at like these nostalgia YouTube channels of videos I used to play, like games I used to play when I was like 10.
Like Donkey Kong. And
well, it was this one called Theme Park was one of them, and SimCity. So like earlier versions basically of what Minecraft is about, which is about building worlds. And I was like looking back at these games going, oh my God, like the skills I was building in these, I just thought I was having fun, but like I was learning about like managing financials. I was learning about business profits and losses. I was learning about what cities need to function, like learning about geography, like all of these things that I hadn't recognized the value in at the time. But now as a parent, like, you know, with a value on a child having a broad learning experience, I can see, wow, like actually the hours and hours and hours my brother and I used to play on these were actually like really worthwhile. And I was able to almost kind of meet myself again without the filter of parents or, you know, or anyone, and go, oh, I can see that that was meaningful for you and why you might have been taken by that thing then at that time in your life. And I can see also how I've used it, even aspects of it now. And so that helps me build more trust in my child that this interest now is really meaningful for him.
Yeah.
And then I also look at like the other things, like the social nature of it, for example, and the building skill sets in language communication and in teamwork, you know, because I'll play online sometimes with like other people. And I think, yeah, like, am I going to be so resistant to the form that I find this in that I'm going to block this learning opportunity? Or can I accept that I don't want to be a Luddite and not move with the world that my children are growing up in and try to like kind of close it off? Or do I learn how to be with it first in my own body and then learn how to be with it in practice with my children by, you know, having parameters, which we've always had, which is that screens don't go in bedrooms and that they're always visible to us and that we know what they're doing and that we participate in it and like are across it is essentially kind of the baseline. Can I trust that if we just have those parameters and that there's an approval process for whatever new game or interest there is, that will be okay and that we'll have a level of trust and safety in this? And so that was helpful. The process, what I'm in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say is the process of going back and looking at my own experience helped me bring more wholeness and less kind of triggered feelings to where my son's at with it.
Because it's literally like putting yourself in his shoes, like at that age, you at that age, rather than you looking at it with a different lens.
Yeah.
It's
it's always really humbling, isn't it, to go like, what if I flipped it and I was in their shoes right now? Like, how would I want to be related to?
Yeah, super helpful. Super helpful. It sort of reminds me of my journey with screens too. I sort of echo everything. I'm not going to go into it, but I sort of echo everything that you said. And that's certainly where I find myself now as well, is actually really enjoying watching my kids on screens because I can see all of those things. And particularly here in Melbourne, where we've had 2 years of significant lockdowns, screens and online gaming were the only way that my children could have social interaction.
Yeah, which is huge.
It's huge. So I really loved how they find their own unique passions and inspirations and will manipulate the game itself based on what they're interested in getting out of it. So I totally, like, I'm down with it. We have parameters. We're certainly not unschooling on screens. We have very clear parameters. We have very clear, device lock-in station at a particular time of night, depending on your age. Like we have, but they were rules within a family that were negotiated together and have continued to, it's not a hard set in stone, because what worked when he was, 10 doesn't work when he's nearly 16. So it's not like this hard and fast rule. It's more like this boundary that we get to continuously negotiate and move with. And I really love that as an opportunity, but can also feel into the edges where I'm like, yeah, I can feel those edges where I've projected, where I've made it mean something because I've been out of touch. I would say the moments that I'm doing that, I'm actually out of touch with my own sense of alignment. Because if I'm really authentically aligned in who I am as I'm presenting in that moment, I see the love and the grace and can communicate more effortlessly. So when I start getting narky, when I start leaping into the meaning of he's going to live a hopeless life and all of those things, if I wind back, I'm ungrounded in those moments. I'm holding stuff in my body. I'm not really present. And so essentially the family dynamic is such that we will use each other to come back to regulation. And, maybe for some of you that will feel like triggering language. So I apologize if that feels like it. Press pause, come back. But family dynamics are such that when someone's out of whack, someone will press exactly the right button to produce a, volcanic eruption so that the whole situation resets back to homeostasis again. And all of the organisms within that environment are doing that. We're always moving with each other to create a type of wholeness. So I can see that it's the perfect setup when I'm not whole.
Yeah. When you're unable to access those parts of yourself consciously or be in like that beautiful balance, that
then it's easier.
They're going to unconsciously seek the things that are going to push you there, or the other people in the dynamic will. I had a visual of like, those old school like arcade games of like the what's the one with the ball that goes and it pings all around?
I was going to say ping pong, but is it?
I'm going to say ping pong too. It's not ping pong. Like the ball when you press the two sides.
No, I know. Wait, are you sure it's not ping pong? This is a pointless conversation.
I know. The ping pong's the one that goes over the net. The one in the the arcade game, and you press the button and the ball, it's like a marble.
And whatever that game is.
Whatever the game is. I'm thinking about this, like it's almost like bits and each person in the family kind of takes up the position, and it's always morphing and changing of those little barriers that try to like stop the ball or move the ball. And it's like everyone's just like bouncing off each other in this like kind of like sometimes what feels like this, I don't know, like overwhelming mishmash of emotions, right?
Yeah.
At one level in a family dynamic, it's going to be functional, right?
Yeah, totally. When you proposed this topic the other day, I was just spending a little bit of time ruminating on it. And I was trying to think, okay, what are the biggest cages that I can see that I've created for myself? Screens was certainly one of them. Meeting needs that you suggested, I was like, yeah, that was totally me too. And then the other one I had was wanting to support them in everything. So having a much reduced tolerance for their struggle. So I have always had the perception, no, I shouldn't say always because that's not true. Beware, imperative language of always and never. But certainly since being more invested in DeMartini work, I'm certainly more aware of the law of conservation and the need for challenge in order to, for the greatest growth. That too much one way or the other is going to result in less growth. So having that lens, I can really see the value in struggle, which I certainly think for my first two children, I was probably more pre-aware parenting. Yeah, somewhere in the muddle there. But I can really see that desire to support them in everything to make sure that if there was some sort of failure or, in inverted commas, failure or challenge or struggle or disappointment or inability to emotionally cope with a moment, that I would blame myself for that. You didn't parent well enough. You didn't prepare them well enough. You weren't good enough in how you showed up for that. Like there was always that self-flagellation that I think can often come with conscious parenting. You didn't do a good enough job.
Yeah. Yeah, big time.
Yeah. So I can see that so much of, and continues to be, because also I, like you, I have that huge void on not being met. So I can still see that it continues to be the work of me teasing that apart, because or else that becomes a cage for me, because I'm stuck in cycles of self-flagellation and self-worth deprivation.
Pushes your self-worth really low and you can't go very well from there.
Right. Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Queen School. 5 weeks to be loved better by becoming a better lover, beginning on Valentine's Day. Let's school you on all things men, women, and intimacy over 5 weeks in a live container with me, where we will go through mask, femme energy, how to communicate, upskilling, how you bring your embodiment to power packet, how you become a magnetic attraction force for the type of relationship you are seeking, understanding what both you and your partner need, and being able to soften and open up in ways you never thought were possible. Find out more at julietenner.love. And at the same time has me, like you were saying with the emotionality, continuously using my time and energy to meet needs that, should I just remove myself from that situation? Do I need to hold back further? Do I need to just take a pause and wait and see what happens before I rush in? Whereas I'm rushing in because I'm like, oh, well, it's going to get to this and this and this. And then I'm dealing with the escalation 5 steps down the track. If I just jumped in now, I don't have to deal with the 5 steps down the track escalation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can still see myself doing that at different times, particularly with my third. So my third has additional needs. And I'll tell you, at her birthday party, we had a horse riding birthday party, which I was already nervous about because I'm like, she really wanted to do it. And I'm thinking, how the fuck, you can't get on a bike. Like, how are you getting on a horse? But I'm thinking, it's all right. Nick and I are both going to be there. We'll just help her on. They're these ponies. They'll be fine. It'll be fine. But of course, it's COVID restrictions. So we get there and parents are not allowed anywhere near them. And I was instantly like, how the fuck is this going to go? Like it hit all. I was already like anxiety. Nick's like, relax. She's going to be okay. This is where I fully value an opposite parenting view.
Bit more chilled, bit more, she'll be right.
Yeah, she'll be right. She'll be right, mate. But also, I think having that sporting background, he just also has respect for challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, competition and challenge has always produced in my history huge amounts of anxiety for me. So I'm still replaying that with my kids, right? Yeah. Anyway, so we sorted out the first bits. She unfortunately got separated from her group of friends. And so she's brushing and grooming this horse, not really knowing what she's doing because she's kind of separated where her pony is. And then the woman who's in charge of the party walks the other girls back to get their helmets and whatever and left Lola in the fucking stables. Oh, no. And I'm watching her and I'm like on the edge of the parenting waiting area, like, like a jumping bean. It's okay. I'm like thinking, do I just jump the rail?
I'll save you.
At the pony club. And she just stands there and I watch her because when she gets overwhelmed, instead of moving into action, she goes into total freeze. Right. And then she just becomes a puddle of tears. Which is what happened. So she can hear me. She's looking at me. I'm giving her the steps of what to do next. And she can't do any of them because she's in this brain flood. Yeah. And so she bursts into tears. And so now I've become a panicky mum. And I'm out of my body. I literally grab the arm of the nearest horse riding woman. And I'm like, it's my dad's birthday party. And she's crying and she's left over there. I'm like this holding this woman's arm. And she's like looking at me going, okay, well, we've just had someone faint So I'll get to her in a minute. And I'm like, let go of her arm. Get a grip, Julie. Okay. So I'm standing here. A fucking parenting pen.
Parenting pen. How perfect.
It is.
Here the
like a wild beast. Watching my child over the other side. Just cry in total flood overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how is she coming back from this in the hour and a half time slot that we have for her birthday party?
Yeah.
Like, because her transition phase is so much slower.
Yeah.
Anyway, they sort her out, they do it, and then they move on with their ponies to the pony arena where they do the things. And they've got to get her on the horse. Now, Lola obviously comes from a tall family. So she is the size and weight of a large adult human.
Mm.
And they're these tiny pony women helping tiny other little children, and my daughter's not. Mm. And they're trying to talk to her about getting on the pony. And I can see her freaking out. I can see her teetering on that edge of overwhelm. And I can see her, like, you know, wide-eyed darting over to me going, what the fuck am I, like, what do I do here? I can't do this. I don't know. Like, I'm watching this whole thing play out. I'm again on the other side of the fucking bed, and I'm turning to Nick. I'm grabbing his arm. She can't do it. She can't do it. We're going to have to get in there. I'm going to have to climb the fence. You're going to have to climb the fence. One of us is going to have to climb the fence and help her. She can't do it. I'm like going like this. And Nick standing there goes, just give her a minute, Julie. And that's when I went, oh, I'm doing that thing. I'm doing that thing where I'm scared about what happens next.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm jumping in before she has a chance to work out whether she can or she can't do it. So because I recognized I was doing that thing, and because I had this very stoic, beautiful, calm man next to me going, it's going to be fine. Let's just wait. Let's just see. And fair enough, it took her, 3 times as long and 2 attendants to talk to her about how to do it. But she did it. And she got on that horse and she sat on there, like, I can feel myself choking my tears. And I was like, oh my God. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
Because I've never let you work it out.
That's
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how many times do we do that? Because how much of that is a cage for me?
Yeah.
Because I am spinning my wheels 5 steps ahead of everyone, trying to make sure she doesn't arrive at that point. But what point? The point where she finds out she can do something? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh my God, I feel everything. Oh, and just that, like that, you have to go to a place within yourself where you're almost like, you have to just let go. Like you had to just let go in that moment and trust that whether she gets on or she gets off, she's going to be okay. But when you've never had evidence or don't have a lot of evidence of that as a potential reality, then it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. It was genuinely, I was worried.
And so on that though, because it's an important, this is important learning here. When she had the chance, when you could let go, because you couldn't be there, there was no way you could help her.
Well, thank fuck there was a fence, because or else I would be there.
Yeah.
And you took a literal fence
to stop you.
Right?
And you think you're helping her.
Yeah.
But yet ultimately there were benefits to her in that moment of it not being you, because in you not being you, she found herself. Like she found her capacity.
Yeah.
And did you notice like a sense of satisfaction or like something in her, like from that experience afterward? Like did she kind of seem pleased with herself or?
Oh, look, she was definitely like on cloud 9, which I could never have predicted was the way it was going to go based on the way that it started. Like in our normal day-to-day life, that certainly wouldn't be the case. Like usually once we've spiraled off, left, that's where we stay for the day.
Yeah.
So definitely satisfaction, and I guess the drive or the desire was big enough for her to keep going too, because normally I would say also she wouldn't keep going.
Yeah.
Like normally if we could never get her to do that for anything at home, wouldn't matter what it was, brushing your hair, getting dressed, getting on a bike. Yeah. We couldn't get her to do any of that at home. So the desire was big enough here that she did it. But I still call that moment to mind where I had that self-realization. I can hear Nick going, just give her a minute. And me having that self-awareness, that almost out of body sense of going, oh shit, you're doing that thing. Just lean back and give her a minute.
Yeah.
Like and sometimes I think that is the grace in those memories that we all have, is because they're so teaching potent that we hold on to them so we can relive that teaching moment as many times as we need it. Because a lesson learned for self is worth 100 of someone telling you a lesson, right?
Yeah. And in fact, I remember sometimes, like, I've thought about this when I've been parenting, I've thought, like, it's taking everything in me right now to do nothing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes in the nothing, in your nothing, is everything for your child.
Totally.
Like what that was.
Yeah. That what you don't do.
Could you hold yourself enough to allow her experience?
Yeah. Yeah, right. And have no guarantees, because you don't know how that's going to go.
That's right. Yeah.
Is this going to go to shit and you're in cleanup mode? Maybe. Maybe.
Would you say that that's a cage that you kind of constantly find yourself coming back to?
Yeah, constantly, because I have such a mothering void, and my perception being that she, in inverted commas, of course I say this because I realize it's still a tainted void, is that she never did anything for me. I seek to continuously do everything for my children and be everything for my children. So obviously the older and the wiser, hopefully, that I have gotten, the more I've been able to equilibrate, understand, and adapt. But it is still a core void that runs me. And I still have to catch myself out on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, those deepest ones, like the ones from your childhood that bring you to your knees, you're never going to really get past them. Like they're part of your mission in the world. They're part of your reason why you're here in many ways, right? And so knowing them, at least if you know them, at least if you can then move with them with more consciousness, like that moment that you had.
Yeah, super powerful moment. I imagine for her as well, but certainly for me. I don't know her obvious internal experience, but, you know, super happy birthday, girl. The other one that I do hear a lot, which I thought was just worth dropping in here as a little mention, was having relationship at the bottom of the needs list.
Yeah.
And that becomes a cage that I hear in my own, you know, world, that a lot of the times we will develop through the lens of my child is so important and their development is so important, which I can completely identify with, that we seek to meet them before we meet ourselves and before we meet our partner and before we meet the relationship. Because it's an entity of its own.
Yeah.
And that we think we're doing the best, healthiest work by continuously meeting our child first. And when we're offered a moment of our partner wants to share their day and our child wants to share their latest Lego creation, that we pick our child first and we ignore our partner.
Yeah.
Or we pick, who knows, meeting the child rather than meeting intimacy. So I see that developing as a long-term cage, because at some point that thing you've pressed to the bottom of the list becomes so painful, or you long for it so desperately when your lens has changed and you've run that roller coaster, or that initial phase is, you know, come full circle, and you start coming back to, I want to be loved, I want to be known, I want to be touched, I want to be seen, I want to be desired. I long for that aspect of my life that I had before children.
Which actually can happen, I think, when children need you less. Like, you know, when your children move past 3, 4, 5, and they're less touchy, less you-centered, it can then create a big pain point for women where they've gone, oh shit, like my relationship, which I haven't really prioritized, is now in this place where there's repulsion, rejection, disconnection.
A lot of hurt.
A lot of hurt.
So many years of not being present. A lot of compounded
hurt.
Yeah.
So a lot of not each person not meeting each other, which I think is heartbreaking because I don't think that that's the intention at all. But I think if we put our child so central that that can be the byproduct, and that ultimately can be a real drawback to a child. Yeah. Really, like the very thing that we thought we were doing by putting them, like by centering them and putting them, you know, in first all of the time.
Yeah,
they can also miss out on what it's like to be held in the fabric of a healthy relationship. Where they are not always the priority, where they're going to be disappointed sometimes because you want to listen to their mum or dad talk before you want to orient to them, or you're going to have a night away and they're not going to be that impressed by it, but you're still choosing that without guilt because you know it's good for you, it's good for the relationship, it's honouring with your partner, and ultimately what's good for the relationship is generally good for the family.
Totally, right?
Not if you're like, you know, check off for 3 months overseas and like, you know.
We're not talking about narcissism of different forms though, are we?
That's right. We're not talking about that. I'm talking about the healthy range, right?
Totally. So that was the only other one that I thought was worth mentioning here because, and I want to say this with like heartache, it's one that I'm sad that I see as often as I do.
Yeah.
That's really hard for women that have chosen to parent as you and I do sometimes to see that, to feel that, to have motivation towards choosing that when they don't have the wisdom and the hindsight or the lived experience that you and I do some years down the track where you go, I know one day you're going to wish you had have, or that was different. And just like you can't just walk in and parent a 15-year-old, you parent the 3-year-old who becomes the 15-year-old. It's the same thing with relationship.
Yeah.
You can't just walk in and have a fantastic relationship. You're parenting that relationship from the beginning, right? And then you reap the rewards later.
And it can be a jarring question to ask, but sometimes the question that I ask is, you know, what kind of relationship do you want to have with this person in 10 years' time? You know, when this child is 14 or this child is 18 or 12 and their social circles have moved well beyond you and you're left with a lot more time in this relationship. What do you want? And then what needs to change? Like, what are the red flags now that are going to be in the way of that then?
Totally. It's great.
So for you, Julie, I mean, that being the cage that you identify for so many women, what suggestions do you have for them to first be with the pain of acknowledging that that's the cage that they're in, and then the steps that they take to move out? I mean, of course, read Flowers and Honey, but like what else?
Yeah, thank you. And of course, Queen School's always there to support your journey. But I would like to probably metaphorically maybe lean it back into the horse riding story with Lola and be like, because I actually don't think it's that different. It doesn't matter what we're talking about here. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the cage that we created with screens, or the cage that we've created with listening, or the cage that we've created with meeting needs, or the cage we've created with relationship. Like I don't know that the strategy needs to be vastly different, because I do think that it just is all revolving around, am I putting into that garden what I hope grows from it?
Yeah.
And, you know, just like that powerful moment I had, you know, with Lola, sometimes we just need someone who, like you just did with that beautiful question, Bridgie, was, is this what you want? Is your investment right now where you want to be? Can you just take a breath, see you got some stuff going on here that's yours, lean back for a moment and really see them.
Yeah.
Not you and your wounds That was the pause part where you looked at them. The lean back is when you really try to see them, when you practice turning off that movie and you find a way to fall in love with them in this moment.
Yeah.
Whether it's your child on Minecraft, or it's your child trying to get on a horse, or it's your partner who's standing there, who chose you and you chose them, and you got to remember why. Like, I don't know that it's a vastly different skill set, but it does require sometimes that we have someone who offers us a little bit of holding, so we don't just sit in our own belief systems.
Yeah. God, that's so huge, isn't it? That's medicine.
So before we wrap up today, we did have a few points that we wanted to leave you with when we talked about this topic of where have you created your own cage in mothering. And we do always want to leave you with how to offer yourself more freedom, because ultimately that's what we're looking to do here in our Nourishing Mother podcast, isn't it, Bridget? Here's some seeds of wisdom from our lived experience. Here's what we've picked up along the way. And we would love for you to fast track that and offer yourself more freedom than what we necessarily perceive that we had back then or now.
Yeah, right.
So we had 3 steps here that we wanted to leave you with. So step 1 was to be with your own anxiety and judgment. Just like, I want you to imagine this is Nick standing next to you going, just give him a minute, or just give yourself a minute. And in that minute, here's the questions you need to ask yourself. What am I making this mean? And when you're clear on that, what is the fear? And what do we know about fear, Bridget?
Oh, fear. Yeah, fear's already happened. So fear, you're fearing something that you've already experienced in the past that was painful and you don't want to experience in some form again. So it's part of going back to the past and exploring it, a little bit like what I was talking about with the video game and, like, you know, what the meaning that we've made, and feeling back into that experience and finding the wisdom that you didn't find in it the first go. And then exploring, you know, what would be the benefits of that happening, right?
Totally. Because if you can see that that worst fear has benefits, you're no longer running from it and it's no longer running you.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Step number 2, consciously look for where the opposite to the belief you're holding is true, and look for people who are doing that opposite and have alignment present. So if you're looking at the decision you're making, let's say with screens, based on a philosophy around it's best for your child, look for people who are doing the opposite and also perceive that it's best for their child's development.
Yeah. Yeah, like spend some time taking up space in that opposite belief, like, you know, walk around in it for a while.
Yeah.
In what ways could I also believe this?
Yeah. Even just sit in the space of those people. So be that physical, you're in certain groups that you access, or certain pages, Instagram pages, groups, whatever. Hang out in the conversation and just feel the tension in your body and practice regulating yourself in it. Giving yourself space.
Like ninja work, but it's like so transformative.
So transformative. And our last step was, how can you begin to create more freedom for yourself right now? So when you know those things and now you're like, okay, I'm ready to stretch some breathing room into my life right now rather than staying in this cage. Remember, like your beautiful Rumi quote, the doors are open, baby.
Yeah.
How are you going to take steps towards those open doors? How can you become more of the open doors? So what are some small ways, and we would never recommend that you jump off the cliff. Small ways, very small, daily actions that are manageable and achievable for you and your nervous system, and gentle for your nervous system. We do not have to shock it into, you know, the high heavens.
Yes.
That you can do every day right now to begin creating more freedom for yourself in your everyday. And one day that'll just be a whole lot easier.
Beautiful. And Julie, what's coming up?
I have Queen School. This is your last chance to enroll in this round of Queen School. We begin on Valentine's Day. So you can find out more at julietenner.love, and it's 5 weeks to invest in your femme, your connection to your body and what's happening for you, to learn new ways of viewing and seeing your partner and masc beings in general, and then to get super savvy with your embodiment and your magnetic power of communication to up-level the type of intimacy that you are having in your relationship. So I'd love you to come join. It's pretty radically cool.
Pretty awesome.
And you, Bridgie?
All things reimagining motherhood, actually, at the moment, and transitions.
I keep hearing about that in all the places, I have to tell you.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Cool. Hope in a good way.
yeah, totally in a good way. Totally good way. Yeah.
So lots and lots of stuff coming up in there. So we do monthly Elixir. So actually broader, it's built upon DeMartini kind of work. So we do monthly group facilitation in there. So that's like really powerful. And at the moment we're still working through our Thrive Through Transitions theme, which has featured a multitude of different guest experts. And I am revamping at the moment our transitions toolkit, which you and I made 4 years ago. And so I'm just tweaking that whenever I have a spare moment. So that was going to be launching this week with either access to it straight away in the group if you're already in the membership, or there'll be a bundle offer if you just want to get that and a little bit of something else. So right, you do that. So you can find out about that at bridgetwood.life. And what about you, Jules?
Just julietenner.love. And you can connect with us as nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram. We love your interactions. If you have a podcast suggestion, we would love to hear from you. So please reach out in all the ways. Bridgie and I are both very social on the socials, and we would love to connect with you.
We are. Remember to nourish the woman, to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.